At the family Christmas party, my parents said coldly bastards should pick up trash or just get out. My daughter Juno was 10 feet away clutching the handmade ornament she'd tried to hang on their enormous living room tree. The words weren't a whisper. They were a thunderclap, cutting through the fake holiday cheer at my parents' vineyard estate. I'm Alara Reed, a 36-year-old financial consultant, and for years I had poured my sanity, time, and money into keeping this family afloat, hoping it would buy a little kindness for my girl. But no. This year, my father, a man who once taught me to analyze balance sheets, used that term, that repulsive word, simply because Juno had accidentally knocked over a tray of expensive glassware. Her small frame instantly crumpled. She covered her face, dropping the ornament, and bolted toward the back door. The sound of the glass shattering was nothing compared to the sound of my heart finally breaking free of this twisted loyalty. My mother's eyes, sharp as shards of ice, just gave me a look of pure contempt, the same look she'd given me since I was 16 and unmarried. I didn't rush after Juno. I didn't yell. I stood there watching the chaos erupt as my sister, the spoiled owner of a failed art gallery, rushed to comfort her own perfect children. I smirked. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but a grimace of absolute finality. I turned away from the noise, moving toward the quiet study, my phone already in hand. I had ordered them the world this year, high-end electronics for their perfect grandchildren, a vintage watch for my father, and a custom wine press accessory for the vineyard, all paid for and scheduled for delivery by a dozen different luxury couriers this afternoon. I pulled up the order confirmation screen, my fingers steady this time. I was done trying to buy my daughter a seat at this table. I hit the first button. Cancel all. The delivery service was clearly confused. 5 minutes later, my phone vibrated, lighting up the name of the main delivery coordinator. The order is being delivered. Do you want to cancel? The text read exactly as I knew it would. I typed a single decisive response. Confirmed. Cancel everything. Zero exceptions. And please note the reason for the cancellation is family dispute. They had no idea. Their perfect Christmas built on my sweat, and my daughter's tears was about to become an empty echo chamber. The gifts wouldn't arrive. The specialized caterer I'd booked was about to get a call from me too. I looked out the window at the sprawling, perfect, debt-ridden family vineyard. They wanted trash gone fine. The trash would take their whole holiday with her. Has your family ever used a holiday celebration as a weapon? Have you ever reached a point where you had to choose between your blood relatives and your child's dignity? Drop a comment below. Share your story, or tell me what you would have done in my place. Trust me, the canceled gifts were just the first step in dismantling their entire operation. You need to stick around to see how they truly paid for every cruel word. The Tucson desert wind was cold against the windows of my small suburban home, but the sudden flare of my phone screen felt colder. I pulled Juno inside her small shoulders, still trembling from the shock of my father's words. I settled her on the couch with her comfort blanket, the scent of gingerbread and pine needles doing little to soothe the rage that coiled in my stomach. The family party was over for us permanently. It wasn't just the term bastard that stung, it was the cumulative weight of years of blatant favoritism. My sister Cora Reed had always been the golden child, regardless of her actual competence. I, Alara, was the mistake, the one who had gotten pregnant young and refused to marry, choosing independence over their prescribed path. I was the financial consultant, the one who understood the spreadsheets, but they only respected the money I brought to their table, never the intelligence that earned it. For decades, the Reed family vineyard, a sprawling and pretentious estate, had been the center of their universe and their financial black hole. Cora, with her failing boutique art gallery downtown, was perpetually struggling, always turning to Dad and Mom for bailouts. And Mom and Dad, Eleanor and Wallace, always came through, but the money ultimately flowed from my pocket. Every holiday, every major purchase for their lifestyle, every small maintenance bill for the vineyard, I funded it, believing it might earn Juno and me a shred of acceptance. It never did. Hours passed. Juno was asleep, finally safe from their cruelty. Around midnight, my phone vibrated again. It was a name I hadn't blocked yet, Cora. I hesitated, then answered, my voice flat, devoid of the forced cheer I usually adopted for them. What do you want, Cora? There was no holiday greeting, only raw panic. Ilara, we're in trouble. Deep trouble. The Christmas deliveries, why did you cancel them? Mom is hysterical, and the kids, they are crying. They're crying because they didn't get their new gadgets. Juno was crying because she was humiliated by Wallace. Draw your own conclusions. I shot back. Cora's tone shifted from entitlement to genuine fear. No, this is about the vineyard. You know about the expansion loan we took out for my gallery. The one Dad co-signed. I froze. I knew they had taken a loan, but they had always dismissed my professional curiosity about the details. The $50,000 loan from the local bank, Cora, the one that was supposedly handled months ago. It wasn't handled. It was restructured, then missed payments. 6 months of them. She admitted, her voice trembling slightly. There's a foreclosure warning on the property. If we don't pay the overdue amount, the bank will seize the vineyard. Wallace is a wreck, and Eleanor, she won't even look at me. Ilara, please. You handle numbers. You always fix things. Just cover the overdue payments. We can restructure it later. Just this one time. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my mind racing. A $50,000 loan that put their entire ridiculous, beloved estate at risk. And they hadn't mentioned a single word of this when accepting my massive gift orders, which were now canceled. They were willing to exploit me for financial gain while actively humiliating my daughter. It wasn't just exploitation. It was profound, toxic betrayal. I had spent years funding their perfect facade only for them to risk it all for Cora's failed vanity project. I didn't give her a definite yes. I simply said, send me the documents. Every single page of the original agreement and the missed payment notices. I need every detail, Cora. Don't leave out a single comma. I heard the relief in her voice, instantly followed by the entitlement returning. Thank you, Ilara. I knew you wouldn't let your parents lose the vineyard. After all, it's our family legacy. The irony was heavy enough to crush the house. My parents' legacy meant nothing if it came at the cost of my daughter's soul. I hung up the phone without another word. The documents arrived instantly, scanned messily. I opened the file. $50,000 was small change compared to the value of the property, but the default clause was terrifyingly clear. I stared at the red stamp, immediate foreclosure warning. I had a decision to make, but first I needed leverage and time. I closed my laptop. My work was about to begin. The documents confirmed the urgency, and a deep-seated need for information replaced my initial anger. I spent the rest of the night poring over the loan documents, the interest rates, and the missed payment schedules. The initial loan amount was indeed $50,000, and the overdue balance was precisely $20,000. This was the moment I committed the one irrational act a financial consultant should never commit. I did it not out of kindness, but out of calculation. I needed to buy time to understand the full scope of their financial disaster, to see what else they were hiding. Early the next morning, I called my credit union. I need to wire $20,000 to this bank reference, this loan number. I stated my voice, professional and detached. It was a massive sum for a temporary reprieve, especially considering their history. They were my flesh and blood, but they were also financial abusers. This was my attempt at a controlled investigation, an emotional and financial risk. I knew the audience would call this decision foolish. Why would an expert throw good money after bad? But I needed to see their next move. I needed to test the waters of their deceit. A few days later, a cryptic text came from my mother, Eleanor. We're having a small party for Jasper's 10th birthday this Saturday. Your presence is required. Bring the girl. No mention of the massive debt crisis I had just temporarily averted. No, thank you. Just a command, a transactional demand for my presence. I almost declined. I almost told her exactly where she could shove her invitation. But I saw the flicker of hope in Juno's eyes. Even after the humiliation, a small part of her still desperately longed for a grandparent's approval. Okay, sweetheart, I told Juno. We'll go, but we stay for 1 hour and then we leave. Together. The day of the party, the vineyard was humming with the sound of laughter balloons and the predictable scent of overly rich food. Cora's son Jasper was decked out in new gear surrounded by gifts. Juno clutched a small, carefully wrapped book she had picked out for him, her hands clammy with nervousness. Eleanor and Wallace gave us a brief mechanical greeting, then returned to praising Jasper for his mountain bike. The blatant contrast was sickening. Cora's daughter Violet immediately swooped in, grabbing Juno's hand and dragging her toward the pile of gifts. But Cora intercepted them. "Oh no, sweetie," Cora said, pulling Violet away. "Jasper needs to open the real presents first. Go play near the gazebo, Juno. Maybe you can clear those empty bottles into the recycling bin." Juno's face fell. The request delivered with a false saccharine smile was a direct echo of my father's cruel trash comment. I watched as my daughter, clutching her gift, retreated to a quiet corner near the outdoor fountain, completely isolated. I started toward her, my fists clenching, but I stopped when I heard their voices. Eleanor was standing by the catering station with Cora, whispering, their heads bowed low over a platter of imported cheese. "It's just the pressure of the vineyard." Eleanor murmured, her voice tight with stress. "We told Alara the money was for the overdue interest, but the truth is, Wallace used most of it to pay off his bookie. We are still short on the actual mortgage payment." Cora nodded, scanning the party dismissively. "Well, she is the one with the money. It's her duty." Then Eleanor looked straight toward the corner where Juno stood alone, clutching her book. The disgust was palpable. "The problem is, she is getting too old to ignore. We just have to put up with it until we're financially stable." "But let's be honest, Cora, that girl, she is not really our grandchild. Not in the way Jasper and Violet are." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not really our grandchild. The $20,000 I had wired had bought me a front row seat to the most profound, calculated betrayal imaginable. I hadn't saved them. I had paid to hear them humiliate my daughter again. I looked at Juno, her head bowed low. She had heard it too. The time for tests was over. The lie wasn't just about the money. It was a deep chasm of calculated deceit that defined our entire history. I drove Juno home in absolute silence. Her tears were silent too, the kind that tear a hole in a mother's soul. I had run out of platitudes and empty reassurances. All the years of hoping, of trying to earn their love with gifts and cash, had been for nothing. I had given them my time and my money, and they had given me back pain and a final, unforgivable lie. The next morning, I was back in professional mode. The time for emotion was over. I needed facts, not feelings. Cora's initial plea had opened the door, and my $20,000 had purchased the documentation I needed to start digging. I spent the afternoon at my office running an exhaustive background check on the vineyard's assets. As a financial consultant, I had access to systems far beyond the reach of a simple inquiry. My focus was the initial $50,000 loan, no AE. I wanted to see the full amortization schedule, the collateral valuation, and the history of payments. I found the paperwork for Loan A quickly. It was messy but manageable. Then I saw it. Tucked away under a different tax identification number, linked to the same property and cross-collateralized with the vineyard's equipment, was a second larger loan. It was a private placement mortgage taken out 8 months earlier, guaranteed by Wallace and Eleanor, listed as an investment acquisition loan. $100,000. I leaned back in my chair, the shock replacing the anger. They hadn't told me a single word about this second debt. Not Cora, not Wallace, not Eleanor. Even when I had wired the $20,000 to save Loan A, they kept Loan B hidden, knowing its balance was far worse. Loan B was 8 months delinquent and the foreclosure warning was imminent. The stakes were no longer a small gallery or a gambling debt. They were playing with the entire value of the property, leveraging a house worth millions against a pile of reckless spending. I needed professional counsel but not sympathy. I called my friend Mara Santos, a successful real estate attorney with a razor-sharp mind, and asked her to meet me for lunch. Mara arrived, her expression serious. I laid out the 2 loan documents on the table. I'm not asking for emotional support, Mara. I need a tactical legal assessment. They lied to me. They hid this. I want to know what my options are to not just walk away, but to ensure they face the real consequences of their choices. Mara examined the documents, her eyes scanning the fine print. She pointed to a clause in the secondary private mortgage, Loan B. This $100,000 debt is held by a regional investor group. They are notorious for liquidation. If you want to stop the foreclosure, you pay the entire balance plus interest and fees. That's easily $110,000. I have the savings, but I won't pay them to save their asses, I stated flatly. Mara smirked, recognizing the cold resolve in my voice. You don't have to. The investor group is motivated. They want to offload this liability quickly for liquidity, especially since Loan A is still a problem. They are likely willing to sell the note at a significant discount to a third party. If you buy the note, Alara, you don't save their house. You become their new creditor. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was perfect. It was professional. It was the ultimate cold-blooded retribution. I would dismantle their empire not with anger but with the very financial principles I was paid to enforce. I spent the rest of the lunch hour developing a strategy to acquire Loan B. The time for being the family bank was over. I was now their debt collector. 2 weeks after the incident at the party, the quiet of my street was shattered by the arrival of a familiar, expensive sedan. I had executed the plan with the precision of a trained professional. Through an anonymous LLC and Mara's legal expertise, the purchase of the secondary debt note, Loan B, was finalized. The $100,000 note was mine, acquired at a considerable discount. Wallace and Eleanor had no idea their daughter was now their biggest creditor. They were still focused on the imminent foreclosure of Loan A, the $50,000 debt I had temporarily stalled. I was working in my home office when I heard the car pull up. I didn't need to look. Only 2 people drove an imported vehicle that pretentious into my modest neighborhood. The knock on the door was heavy, desperate. Juno was at school, and I was immensely grateful for the solitude. I opened the door, my expression unreadable. Eleanor and Wallace stood on my porch. They looked aged, exhausted, and utterly defeated, a stark contrast to their usual facade of vineyard royalty. Eleanor carried a worn branded file folder, the kind that screamed bank documents. Ilara, we need to talk. Wallace began, his voice rough with anxiety. He skipped the pleasantries entirely. The vineyard. It's going to auction next week. We need your help to stop it. The $50,000 loan. I asked, stepping aside to let them in. I led them to my kitchen table where the file folder became the centerpiece. Eleanor didn't meet my gaze. It's a mistake, darling. Just a short-term liquidity issue. If you could just cover the remaining principal, we can restructure it over time. I didn't argue the point. I simply laid out the facts, one truth bomb after another. You ignored Juno her entire life. Wallace called her a bastard at Christmas. Eleanor said she wasn't really your grandchild at the birthday party. Eleanor's face crumpled. We didn't mean it like that. We were stressed about the money. It's family, Alara. We're desperate. Desperate. I let out a sharp, cold laugh. I paid your Christmas bills, your extravagant dinners, your gifts for years. I wired $20,000 to save you from one small loan, and you immediately repaid me by lying about your gambling debts and humiliating my daughter. Wallace finally spoke up, his voice cracking. If we lose the vineyard, we lose everything. We have nowhere to go. I pushed a different stack of papers across the table, copies of the delinquency notices for Loan B. You should have thought of that before risking the house for Cora's failed gallery and your own vices. You chose Cora. You chose the debt. You chose the lie. The problem isn't the loan, Wallace. The problem is you two. I stood up, walking to the counter and retrieving my own file. I returned, my hand resting firmly on the purchase agreement for Loan B. You expect me to be your bank again? I asked, my voice rising slightly. I'm done being your bank. I'm done being your rescue parachute. Wallace reached across the table, his hand outstretched. Please, Alara, we'll change. We'll include Juno. We promise. I intercepted his hand and placed my file on top of the foreclosure notice. No, you won't. You can't. You crossed a line, and now you face the consequences. The tension in the room was suffocating. I needed to end this now. I watched their desperate faces, feeling no guilt, only the profound stillness of absolute finality. They stared at the new file I had placed on the table, their eyes glazing over the unfamiliar legal terminology. They were confused, but not yet defeated. What is this, Alara? Eleanor asked, her voice laced with suspicion, attempting to regain control of the narrative. A counteroffer. A new payment plan. I shook my head slowly, allowing the weight of the truth to sink in. No, Eleanor, this is the purchase agreement for your secondary mortgage, Loan B, the $100,000 note you conveniently forgot to mention. I paused for effect, letting the silence scream the betrayal. Wallace finally understood. His face went pale. You bought our note. You are the creditor. I confirm, the word ringing with authority. I own Loan B, and since the terms allow for immediate full repayment upon default, which you've been in for 8 months, and since I have no intention of restructuring or extending the term, I am calling in the full balance immediately. Eleanor shrieked, jumping up from her chair. You can't. We're your parents. We gave you everything. You gave me a life of judgment, shame, and a broken relationship with my own father. I countered, my voice dangerously level. You took everything I offered, my money, my time, my hope, and you used it to fund your entitlement while treating my daughter as an outcast. You thought you could use my professional skill to bail out your amateur recklessness. We will pay it back. Wallace pleaded, his former arrogance completely gone, replaced by naked fear. We'll sell the equipment. We'll mortgage the land. You've already done that, I pointed out, gesturing to the stack of documents. And I don't believe your promises anymore. As your creditor, I assure you, I will pursue the collateral on this note. Your beloved vineyard property. I'm done being your bank. I'm done being your daughter. I'm done. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, the cool air flooding the tense kitchen. The terms of the note are non-negotiable. You have 48 hours to vacate the property. My lawyer will be in touch with yours regarding the execution of the collateral lien. Eleanor burst into tears, a dramatic performative act I had witnessed 1,000 times, but this time it held no power. You're doing this to your own mother. You're heartless. I am a mother protecting her child. I corrected, my gaze fixed on Wallace. You made your choice the moment you allowed those words to be spoken to Juno. Now live with the consequences. Wallace and Eleanor gathered their files in stunned silence. They walked out of my house defeated and broken without another word. As their car pulled away, I felt a physical weight lift from my chest. That night, I blocked their numbers and Cora's, unfollowing them on all social media platforms. The chain was finally permanently broken. The silence that followed was a strange kind of freedom, heavy yet liberating. The confrontation at my doorstep was not the end, but the legal beginning. Within the promised 48 hours, Eleanor and Wallace contacted Mara's office, their attempts at negotiation pathetic and swiftly dismissed. As the holder of the secondary mortgage, my claim was ironclad. My lawyer executed the lien. The Reed vineyard, that symbol of my family's pride and hypocrisy, was quickly seized and scheduled for public auction. The process typical of high-value property foreclosures in the state was swift and unforgiving. The value of the property was insufficient to cover both the principal of Loan A and Loan B, the legal fees, and the remaining tax liability. The facade of wealth vanished instantly. The auction happened 3 months later. I didn't attend, but Mara kept me informed. The property was sold to an investment group that planned to turn the land into high-density housing, the ultimate end for a place that claimed such a privileged legacy. The consequences for the other players were immediate and brutal. Cora Reed's carefully constructed life imploded. The financial shame, compounded by the loss of the family guarantee, finally sunk her boutique art gallery. She tried to blame me publicly, posting cryptic messages about family disloyalty, but the documents outlining the 2 loans and the gross mismanagement were public record. Her husband, Sterling, who had always looked down his nose at my single mother status, was forced to face the reality of their joint financial liability. The marriage dissolved rapidly. Sterling filed for divorce, taking their children Jasper and Violet back east to live with his own affluent family. Cora was left with nothing but debt and a tarnished reputation. The fate of Wallace and Eleanor was the most difficult to process, yet the most fitting. Having lost their primary asset, their savings, and their status, they had nowhere to go. They couldn't stay with Cora, who was broke and drowning in her own legal battles. Their final option was a small subsidized apartment complex on the less desirable outskirts of the city, a place far removed from the rolling hills and opulent parties of the vineyard. They tried to call once more months later. It was Wallace. I didn't answer. I simply deleted the notification. This wasn't a fairy tale ending where they saw the light and begged for forgiveness. This was real life in America. In real life, pride and financial recklessness lead to bankruptcy and ruin. They had lost their status, their wealth, and their nuclear family unit. They were left with the emptiness they had created, isolated from the very people they had tried so hard to impress. Juno and I, meanwhile, were finally safe. I had used the funds recovered from the discounted purchase of Loan B to replenish my savings, and more importantly, I had bought back our peace. 1 year later, the scent of fresh pine and baking cookies filled my small, quiet kitchen. The following Christmas was different. There were no frantic calls, no massive anxiety-inducing shopping lists, and no need to prepare for emotional warfare. We set up a modest tree in the living room, strung with the same lights Juno and I had put up the year before. The magic wasn't in the size of the gifts under the tree, but in the silence, a silence free from judgment and manipulation. Juno, now a year older, was thriving. She was calm, confident, and no longer questioned her worth. Her smile was genuine, not the forced, anxious grimace I had seen countless times at the vineyard. We made homemade ornaments, listened to holiday music, and curled up on the couch watching old movies. We were small, but we were whole. We were a family built on mutual respect and unwavering protection. Looking back, the financial retribution, the professional dismantling of their vineyard empire was necessary. It wasn't about the money. It was about the line they crossed. They demanded I save them, yet they were willing to sacrifice my daughter's dignity. My final act was not about cruelty, but about establishing a boundary that could never be moved again. The lesson I learned, the lesson I hope to share, is this: you do not owe allegiance to toxicity regardless of blood relation. Family is not an obligation based on genetics. It is an active choice based on who shows up, who respects your boundaries, and who protects your children. I was willing to sacrifice a significant portion of my savings and risk my professional reputation to buy back our peace, and ensure Juno never again heard those cruel, demeaning words. In the end, I lost a toxic family, but I gained my daughter's absolute trust and my own self-respect. It was the best investment I ever made. The consequence for Eleanor Wallace and Cora was the loss of their status, their stability, and their financial comfort, a perfectly real-life consequence for people who live their lives built on borrowed money and borrowed time. They had chosen greed and pride over genuine connection, and their legacy crumbled under the weight of their own debt. I am free. Juno is safe. We are enough. Thank you for listening to my story. I know many of you have faced similar situations where you had to choose between family obligation and self-preservation. If you were in my position as a financial professional, would you have simply walked away, or would you have used your skills to ensure they face the true final consequences? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Your input means the world to us.